gentlemen, Annabel Tippin.
We'll wait till everybody takes their seats. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming, and welcome to Fracking, the big debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. We're here at Haydock Park Racecourse in the heart of the North West, and it's estimated that around 2,000 metres below our feet here is shale gas, trapped in rocks. Not that we're obviously not suggesting that they're about to start drilling out on the racecourse now, we hope. Anyway, I don't know if anybody's got any ideas to do that. They're not listening. They're getting their drinks. But it is widely accepted that the North West has large amounts of shale underground. So the question is whether we should go ahead and drill for that gas by using the controversial technique of fracking. And that's what, of course, we'll all be debating here with the help of our panel of guests and an audience of people from right across the North West. Before we introduce our panel, though, we really need to explain, I suppose, what is fracking. So here's Matt Truan with everything you need to know in 60 seconds.
The word fracking is short for hydraulic fracturing, and in simple terms it's a way of extracting or getting out natural gas which is trapped in rocks below the ground. But what is the fracking process? Well, a mixture of water, sand and a small amount of chemicals is pumped down a well at high pressure. That mixture pushes apart or fractures a rock and allows the gas which is trapped inside to flow back up where it can be captured. And there's plenty of shale here in the northwest. Some say there's enough to power the country for decades, but it's a highly controversial technique which has attracted fierce opposition. The anti-fracking movement say the chemicals used could potentially contaminate water supplies. There's also concern about earth tremors, air pollution and the impact on people's health. However, the shale gas industry and the government insist fracking in the UK will be safe and well regulated. They say tapping into this huge gas reserve will bring jobs, energy security and will help stabilise our gas prices in the future.
Matt Truan there. So let's introduce you to our panel then. We're going to ask each of you to give a short opening summary of why you think fracking will be good or bad for the North West. You've got a maximum of 30 seconds, and we will be timing. So we mean a maximum of 30 seconds. So let me introduce our first panellist. Francis Egan is the Chief Executive of Quadrilla Resources, the energy company that's been exploring for shale gas in Lancashire since 2010. He joined the company 2 years ago after some 30 years of working in engineering and management in the oil and gas industry. Originally from Ireland, Francis lives in the North West now with his wife and 2 children.
Thank you. So in 30 seconds, I and many others are convinced that domestically produced shale gas is going to have a key role to play, along with nuclear and renewables, in our energy supply mix moving forward in the North West and the rest of England, and indeed all of the UK. Sitting far beneath our feet here, we have several trillion cubic feet of gas. If we could recover just 10% of what we believe is in the ground in Lancashire alone, that's probably worth about £140 billion at today's prices. That's a huge economic opportunity. I'm convinced that Lancashire has the ability to deliver it.
Just got it in. Well done. John Blaymyers is the Chief Operating Officer at iGas, the company currently exploring for shale gas and coalbed methane at Barton Moss in Salford. The firm also has licences to explore in Cheshire and Merseyside. John has 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, including operations in the United States, West Africa and Southeast Asia. He's originally, though, from here in the North West.
Thank you, Annabel. Good evening, everybody. First of all, we all enjoy a hot shower, washing clothes and cooking family meals are things we take for granted, but we can't do that without energy. You know, energy is essential. We are seeing declining power stations. We're seeing the North Sea in decline. We have to ensure we've got security of supply so we can keep the lights on. We need to explore a range of technologies to do that, and that includes renewables, but it also potentially includes shale as a possible source of that energy.
Tom Crotty is a director at the international chemical company INEOS. The firm employs around 1,400 people at its plant in Runcorn and 15,000 across the world. He also sits on the CBI's Energy and Climate Change Board. He's a strong supporter of the shale gas industry and the impact it could have on business and the wider economy. Tom was born in Ireland but has lived here in the northwest for most of his life.
Thank you, Annabelle. Chemicals is our business and is an integral part of the northwest economy, and it's seriously threatened. Right now, energy prices for us are about 70% higher than our competitors on the continent and double what we're paying for our competitors in America. Shale gas is bringing about a renaissance in American chemicals, $70 billion of new investment. That's an enormous threat. We will not have a chemical industry in this country unless we exploit this potential opportunity.
Oh, under 30 seconds. Well done. Well, I guess they are the ones that we would say are for shale gas. Let's now move on to the people not for shale gas. And we'll start with Barbara Keeley, who's the Labour MP for Worsley and Eccles South. She's been an MP in the area since 2005, and she's also a member of the Commons Health Committee. iGas's exploratory drilling site at Barton-Moss in Salford is in her constituency, and she's publicly voiced her concerns about fracking. Barbara has lived and worked in the northwest for the past 30 years.
Well, Annabelle, I've never agreed with the shale gas exploration at Barton-Moss. It's causing the industrialisation of land near Chatmoss, which is a precious area of greenbelt land. It's an untested process. It's brought us controversy, protest and lots of traffic congestion. It's causing harm and distress, and I'm very concerned about the possible health hazards for people, animals and wildlife. It's bringing major disruption and financial loss to my constituents. If that was played out across the northwest, it would be very damaging.
Thank you, Barbara. Helen Rimmer is the North West campaigner for the environmental group Friends of the Earth, with whom she's worked for 6 years. Before that, she was with the Government Sustainable Development Commission. She works with various anti-fracking campaign groups across the region and was born and brought up in Leyland in Lancashire. She now lives in Greater Manchester.
We think unconventional fossil fuels and fracking is highly risky for the environment, for the health of communities and for our climate. It's not the answer to our energy problems. It will add more climate-changing emissions into the atmosphere while doing nothing to reduce our energy bills. We have a much more positive vision for the northwest economy, and that's one that's based on renewable energy, clean renewable energy, community-owned energy, and making our homes more energy efficient and cutting energy waste. And that will be better for jobs, better for local economies, and will protect our precious environment as well.
And spot on time-wise. Well done, Helen. Now, finally, Mike Hill is a chartered electrical engineer with experience in the oil and gas industry. He's recently carried out a 3-year study into the regulation of the shale gas industry. He's currently part of a team advising the European Commission, and he's given evidence to the government and the Royal Society. He also advises several anti-fracking campaign groups. Mike lives with his family in Lytham on Lancashire's Fylde coast.
Thanks, Annabelle. Yes, basically, in a nutshell, the situation is that regulations in this country, the regulatory regime, the regulators themselves and the inspection thereof is not sufficient to cope with shale gas onshore in the UK. And in the 3 years that I've been researching those regulations, I found the government cutting the regulators back, opposing any new regulations and not implementing at all, bar one, of the Royal Society's recommendations to allow shale gas to go on in this country. So it shouldn't happen at this stage, not at all.
OK, so they are our 6 panellists this evening. Can we please have our first question?
I'm Bob Roach. I'm a member of the St Helens University of the Third Age. And in that setting, I run a group aimed at people without a science background, but who want to understand more about science and technology. My question is that, recognising that we've got to get our energy from somewhere, what impact could fracking have on our energy? And I recognise some points have been made already on that point. And secondly, would it be better for us to have fracking, or worse, than meeting our needs for energy from nuclear reactors?
OK, so Helen Rimmer, Friends of the Earth, would it be better to get more of our energy, or worse, to get more of our energy from nuclear power?
We don't think we need unconventional gas or nuclear because we have such excellent renewable resources in the UK, and particularly in the northwest of England. We have huge offshore wind resource in the Irish Sea. We have tidal power. Potentially we could have wave power. And, of course, we've got solar and other smaller scale energies as well at our disposal. So we don't think we actually need either, and there's plenty of evidence to show that modelling. And I think the question about whether we do need shale gas to meet the energy needs right now, we don't need to be finding new sources of fossil fuels because we already have more than we can burn in conventional, proven resources of gas. We don't need to be finding these risky, unconventional sources. And we simply have to reduce our fossil fuel use for climate change. We need to keep within 2 degrees to keep to a safe climate. We're already seeing the effects of climate change this winter with the floods, and we've had floods in Lancashire as well over the past few years. So we need to be moving away from fossil fuels, investing in our renewable energy resources and reducing our energy demand.
So, John Blamars, we don't need more unconventional sources of energy.
Well, 2 things. One, we need multiple types of energy. We can't rely entirely on renewables. We have to rely, at the moment, predominantly on coal, which has a much worse CO2 impact than gas. Gas has half the impact of coal. So what we should be doing is displacing coal from the mix, point 1. Point 2, I think we will need nuclear, and we will need renewables. We'll need all these forms of energy. We will not be able to survive without it. At the moment, renewables fulfill about somewhere between 5 and 10% of the total energy requirements. It is never going to reach a point where it can take up the slack of gas, etc., from the energy mix, point 1. And point 2, you will not be able to afford it if it takes on that. It can only probably manage about 20% of our total energy requirements.
That's not true when you look at other European countries who have a much higher proportion of renewables in their energy mix. It's simply not true.
The UK gets 4% of its energy from renewables. 4%. If you take out nuclear. So this fantasy that we can supply all our energy from renewables and energy efficiency in anything less than decades is just lying to people. We get 96% of our energy from non-renewables. That's a fact. That is a fact. That includes
the reality
Scotland.
Is the DEC,
4% of our energy.
One second. Let's bring Mike Hill in.
Yeah, sorry. When I was discussing this with the DEC on a number of occasions down in London, the DEC have made it clear to me that... who's
the
Department of Energy and Climate
right.
Change. Sorry, the Department of Energy and Climate Change made it clear to me that shale gas will never form greater than 5% of the UK's energy in any one year. And I asked them why not. So Francis talks about 4%, shale will only ever be 5%. And I asked them why not, and they said because we would have to evacuate whole areas of the country if we were to allow production to be greater than 5%. In terms of the renewables energy mix, I agree to a certain extent with John. We do need a mix of energy in the UK, absolutely, but not at the cost of the public's health. I don't care whether it's nuclear, coal, whatever it is, you can't be exploring and then producing shale gas to the cost of the public's health. Not at all.
Let's bring Francis Egan back in on that one.
So I don't know who Mike is talking to in DEC, but the idea that we can only get 5% from shale gas is just nonsense. Let me finish, please. I listen to you. Can you listen to me, please? 5%. So who's going to limit it to 5%?
The government are going to limit it to 5%.
So who in the government has said that, Mike?
I'm not going to say that, Francis. I'm not going to say that. Because that
that's good, Mike. Yeah.
No,
so maybe the government will answer tomorrow who has said that they'll limit it to 5%, but I certainly never heard anyone in the government say that.
Mark Menzies, for a start-off, said it would be limited to 5%.
No objection to nuclear either. I think they both have a part to play. But renewables and nuclear cannot, combined even, satisfy our energy needs. We need gas. Everybody here is probably using gas to heat your houses or cook your food. Everybody. So you need gas. So offshore gas declined. We are currently importing 50% of our gas. By 2030, we'll be importing 90% of our gas. Offshore gas is in free fall.
Let's if I can.
No, Francis, it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited to 5%. That's the reality of the situation.
Hold on a sec. So we're not going to hear anybody if everyone speaks. Tom Crotty.
If I could just pick up this issue on offshore for a moment, because I don't have an axe to grind here. We're not in this industry. We're a user. We're like you, only we use a lot more to make products that everybody uses in their everyday life. We currently get our gas from the North Sea. We can currently only run our North Sea-based plants at half rate because the North Sea is in free-fall decline, exactly as Francis has said. And we have to find a way to replace that. It's a choice. You know, the country has a choice. It can do that, or it can choose to let its energy-intensive industries disappear and therefore lose its manufacturing base. I think that is a choice, and that's the reality of the decisions we've got to make. They're tough decisions, and we have to make those tough decisions.
Barbara Keeley?
Well, just very briefly, we're hearing it's a choice. My community doesn't have a choice. My community has had this foisted on them when they didn't know what to expect, and it's causing great distress and impact on their lives. And I think we have a government that isn't interested in renewables. We have a Prime Minister that says he's going all out for shale gas. So the balance and the choice has gone out of this discussion. This government is doing everything it can, including bribes to local councils and whatever it takes. Well, I hope you think so. But, I mean, it's just a really interesting point, choice. Who's got the choice? My community doesn't have the choice.
Before I go back to our gentleman that asked the question, John, you did have your hand up, so I'll come back to you very briefly, please.
Very briefly, just some facts for you to put this into some context. The UK burns 3 trillion cubic feet of gas a year, so our total gas consumption that we use at the moment is 3 trillion cubic feet. The North Sea has 19 trillion cubic feet left. Now, we might find some more, but it's got 19. So it's roughly 6 to 8 years. If we just burnt gas from the North Sea, it would last for about 6 to 8 years. Underneath the north of England, if you was just assume a 10% recovery from the figures quoted by the British Geological Survey...
10% is way too high.
If you take the figures, which is that 10% is 130 trillion cubic feet, which is 50 years.
You won't get it. If you look at studies around the world, you look at the Marcellus, you look at the Barnett.
I know worked in the Marcellus, so I understand
right,
it, Mike.
So the average for the UK is expected to be, for the Boland Shale, about 3%.
That is
3%.
Mike. So which geologist told you that?
I'm gonna go back to Bob, because he asked the question. But there's Bob.
I'm all in favour of us doing all we can to reduce energy need, and I'm all in favour of doing what we can to develop renewable sources of energy. But it strikes me that there's still going to be a gap, and it's the alternatives that we have to fill that gap that I don't like any of them, really. I'm very wary of fracking and the effect that can cause on the locality where fracking is taking place.
Bob, do you live near a
Yes, I live nearby,
site?
yes. I'm very bothered at the idea of nuclear power and the 1,000 years legacy that leaves behind. I just don't like the situation we're in. It's a very difficult one indeed.
OK, thank you very much. Let's go on to our next question now.
Yes, my name is Lawrence Rankin. I'm from the Ribble Estuary Against Fracking and the Green Party. My question is, given the record of initially denying any links with earthquakes, denying any risks to health, and claiming they knew how to treat radioactive waste, all of which proved false, how can we ever trust the frackers?
OK. So, Francis Egan, I'll come to you first. This is a question of trust.
So, I understand that people were concerned about the tremors that occurred at Priest Hall, and that's understandable, and in fact it shut down the industry for the best part of 2 years. And there's been 2 detailed independent studies done, and the government have introduced a traffic light system that will require us to put up to 80 separate seismic monitoring stations around each well site, and keep any seismic activity to a level, I don't want to get too technical, but a 0.5 level on a Richter scale, which... Would you like me to answer the question or listen to you? So I'll answer the question then. Thank you very much. So would keep us to 0.5 on the Richter scale. So the risk of seismic activity has been studied by the Royal Society, the Royal Academy, and Durham University. They issued a report, and all concluding that will be negligible. As regards the other issues, I mean, we will publicly declare what chemicals we're putting into our fracturing fluid. Our fracturing fluid will be non-hazardous. Non-hazardous. So I have the Environment... Would you like to ask the Environment Agency? Non-hazardous...
The Environment Agency don't know because they don't check, Francis.
Can I finish? Non-hazardous to groundwater. no toxic chemicals in the fracturing fluid. One. The same for full production. We will not use fracturing fluid that is hazardous to groundwater.
Even if Quadrilla use no chemicals at the surface at all, what flows up in the flows...
Mike, hang on a sec. And sadly, we can't hear your questions. You won't be able to hear them. I know the panel can, but we can't. So try not to shout out if you can. I know it's difficult and you want to get involved, but we won't necessarily be able to hear your questions when it gets broadcast, I'm afraid.
So our fracturing fluid, as I said, will be disclosed on our website, on the Environment Agency website, and the Environment Agency will come, sample, monitor it and report on it. So you don't have to trust me for it. You've got Steve Molyneux from the Environment Agency here in the front row.
We will be speaking to Steve Molyneux from the Environment Agency shortly. Good. First of all, let me bring Barbara Keeley back in. iGas are drilling in your constituency.
Yes.
Do you trust them? Do you trust that everything is being regulated as it should be?
I'm afraid I don't. I don't at all. They're in the exploratory phase. I have found iGas not an easy organisation to work for. Their meetings are closed. Residents find themselves, people who live locally and are affected find themselves locked out of meetings. Communications are very poor. We've seen instances quite recently of chemicals leaking on delivery and a van having HGV having to be pulled out of the convoy because of that. Recently I've had to write to the Environment Agency because it appears they're using radioactive materials which we weren't expecting and that I hadn't seen in the documentation. There is no trust. People living in the locality didn't know this was happening. It sort of crept up on them. But I have to say the volume of complaints and issues and just sheer worry and anxiety and stress that I'm getting from my constituents is very marked. And it's quite clear that they didn't know what was going to hit them when this came along.
So, John Blimers, is that a fair point? They didn't know what was coming, and are you using radioactive material?
Let's try and get a few things clear here. As part and parcel of any activity that any company goes about in terms of drilling, there's public engagement at the outset, there are consultations, there are environmental assessments done. It is governed by both the Department of Energy and Climate Change, the Health and Safety Executive, the Environment Agency, and the local planning officers and the local council. And there are a number of conditions that are attached to that. Barbara is being a little bit economic with some of the facts here, in the sense that we have a community liaison group that was established and it's been in existence for several years.
Limited to 17 people? Limited to attendance of 17
it is
people.
limited to representatives of the various communities, and that was set up in accordance with the planning conditions. And those representatives then represent and act and communicate on behalf of the communities in which they come.
That's not true.
That is absolutely the case.
I'm afraid I get the backhorse from this, so don't tell me things that aren't true.
Well,
Barbara, if you're saying to me,
you will also be aware.
You have closed meetings. I've had complaints from people who say they attended to try to get some information and were excluded from a meeting, and that's happened on a number of occasions.
We have held public open days. We've had consultation in the local press.
You have never had open days. You never let the public attend openly.
Categorically, and you were invited but refused to come, Barbara, if you recall.
You always have a list, and you always check who everyone is before they can come in.
Barbara, you've also been invited to attend those meetings and have also refused that invitation as well on several occasions.
So, John, what about the point that Barbara made, the radioactive point?
The radioactive material, they're part of the logging suite. When one does this, is very standard. It is a tool that has a little radioactive source in it. It is done. It's used in the mining industry. It's used in water wells. It's the same thing that you find in an X-ray machine or in an MRI scanner. And what that does is it measures whether or not the fluid in the rock contains hydrogen, oxygen, etc. So we can determine whether there's water or gas or oil in the rock. It is completely and utterly permitted. It is a small
It wasn't mentioned
source.
in your mining waste permit documents.
It is. It's part and
It
parcel.
isn't
It's
mentioned
standard.
in them. I've looked at every line of those, and it's not mentioned in there.
Helen, we can have a conversation like this, or we can also, I can defer to the health and safety executive gentleman here.
Well,
this is standard.
Yeah,
let
me bring it back. Let me bring it back to the question, because the question was about trust. I think I probably know what Friends of the Earth's answer is to this, Helen.
I think clearly that there is no trust from residents in this industry. There's no trust in the government as well, because the government is full of vested interests in the unconventional gas sector. And Just to illustrate an example, we've heard from about iGas from Barbara, but Quadrilla have consistently breached their planning conditions. They drilled into the wintering birds season at the Beaconsall site in West Lancashire. They're still yet to clear up the mess at Priest Hall, even though they were told to do by the end of December 2013. And of course, you caused earth tremors.
What is the mess at Priest Hall?
You haven't restored the site back to its prior use.
We haven't got planning consent to do that yet. What mess?
Your planning consent was to do it by December 2013. You did nothing at all last year.
What is the mess at Priest
Hall? The mess is a damaged well. We don't know how you're going to monitor it.
Where's the mess?
It's a damaged well, so the well was damaged by the earth tremor, and you didn't inform the Department for Energy and Climate Change about that. And of course, the final thing is the Advertising Standards Authority has pulled you up for exaggeration, unsubstantiated claims and misinformation, and you still continue to talk about the Ellswick well like it's a fracking site when we know it's a single vertical conventional gas well that has not been fracked at high volume.
Has been fracked.
We're going to talk about the regulation of wells shortly, but I'll come back to you, Francis. You listen to some of the audience and the panellists over the other side from you there. How can you get people's trust here? How are you going to win people over? Hang on a sec. Let Francis answer.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's an ongoing process. The polling shows that 2-to-1 people are in favour of exploring for shale gas. The people.
Most people are undecided.
2-to-1. So, and I think the people who are
polls is that?
That's the Nottingham University poll, the BBC Northwest poll.
The Daily Telegraph poll doesn't show that for us.
2-to-1, and I did 2-to-1 in favour of continuing exploration. So, the people who support don't make as much noise as opponents, but that's the polling. But I don't claim that everybody's in favour of it.
But listen,
but we need to continue talking. We need to keep speaking.
Even if you had nothing at the surface, right? And in terms of trust in the EA, under Freedom of Information Act, the EA told me they will not and do not check what chemicals you add at the surface. They're also not verifying the quantity of flowback that comes up. They told me they ask Quadrilla. But that aside, even if you add nothing at the surface, what flows back up the well is naturally occurring radioactive material at 90 times the maximum permissible level, lead at 1,438 times the safe level of drinking water, cadmium at 150 times, bromide at 2,297 times, chromium 636, 197 times the level of aluminium, and 20 times the safe level of arsenic.
Mike, I hate to interrupt you with all your
I hate to interrupt as well, but they're actually all wrong.
However, I am going to stop
website,
you.
so
I am going to stop you because this is something we will go on to, and a lot of these subjects are going to overlap. So we're going to try and sort of stick to the subject matter, the question matter, which is trust. So if I can go back to Lawrence Rankin, who asked the question, do you have trust?
I don't have trust, and I don't think the representatives of the operations really gave any answer to that. The fact they deny things and then only admit them when they're proved in black and white. They drag their feet, they try to do the absolute minimum, and they try to avoid the regulation that is there, weak though it is. For example, with environmental impact assessment, it's only required for sites greater than 1 hectare. Strangely enough, their sites tend to be 0.99 hectares.
I'll let you come back, John, just very quickly on that.
Just very briefly, you're referring to something called a coma site. That's a different element. That's what you're referring to. We do environmental impact assessments. That's part and parcel.
You didn't do one at Barton Moss.
We did, Barbara. There are the reports, and they were submitted to the planning officers.
You haven't published it.
Not for Priest Hall.
Could I say...
Not for Banks. Not for Singleton.
Could I say that I insisted, I made this point again and again when I objected to your mining waste permit application, and you've talked about the planning application. The only planning application that went to our local council as the planning authority was in 2010, was for coal bed methane, was not for what you're doing now on shale gas. You're allowed to do that, but that's why local people feel betrayed and feel a lack of trust, because you don't even have a planning permission for what you're doing now, and that's why people feel it's wrong.
Okay, let's move on.
At the risk, Barbara, of being a little bit, we are acting in accordance with the planning consents that have been granted, and we are not drilling for shale gas.
I'm going to stop you there. All right, I'm going to stop you there, and we'll move on. But it's just A reminder, you're listening to Fracking the Big Debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Let's remind you of our panel guests: Francis Egan from Quadrilla, John Blamires from iGas, Tom Crotty from the chemical firm INEOS, the MP for Worsley and Eccles South, Barbara Keeley, engineer Mike Hill, and Helen Rimmer from North West Friends of the Earth. Right, can we have our next question, please?
Hello, I'm Anne Selby. I'm the Chief Exec of the Wildlife Trust for Lancashire, Manchester, Merseyside. My question is really about the sort of regulation. I wanted to ask the panel sort of how confident they are in the ability of the Environment Agency to regulate the wastewater discharges from the fracking industry so that the environment will be protected. And I suppose there's a secondary question there about will the Environment Agency be under undue pressure from the government to let things go ahead anyway?
All right, Anne, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to come to Steve Molyneux now, who has come here, Environment Manager for Lancashire Environment Agencies. Thank you very much. And the Environment Agency has been mentioned a couple of times here now. We're talking particularly about wastewater that comes back out of the well. That was Anne's question. After fracking, which contains potentially dangerous chemicals. So how will this be regulated?
Okay, the UK has some of the strictest environmental regulation in the world. In terms of activities that are onshore oil and gas exploration, up to 8 environmental permits may be required for each well site if that's going to go ahead. One of the permits that is always required is what's called an environmental regulations permit, which requires the operators to have a waste management plan for how they're going to deal with flowback water that comes out of the well. That requires them to detail how much there will be, to test that, to have proper disposal routes and proper containment on site. Those permits are inspected by the Environment Agency. So, for example, at the pre-soil site, the Environment Agency undertook 16 independent inspections of that site, sampling the flowback water 7 times. Yes, there are hazards associated with unconventional gas. Yes, there are chemicals that are dissolved in the water and dissolved from the rocks when it comes back to the surface. But the UK has a very robust industrial treatment facilities that are across the country that can treat this appropriately. But it has to be done under permits, has to be licensed, and is verified by the Environment Agency.
This is something new, though, isn't it? And when it's something relatively new, it's more difficult to regulate. You've no experience, particularly, of this.
I wouldn't say it was new. The types of effluents that are being produced are non-hazardous. The Environment Agency has over 15 years of experience of regulating British UK industry to very high standards to protect people in the environment. So whilst fracking in UK may be new, the types of chemicals that are used, the types of effluents that are produced aren't new to regulators.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Mike Hill, you're an engineer. You've studied the regulation of the shale gas industry. Are you confident in how it will be regulated here in the UK?
Absolutely not. In the 3 years that I have been studying the regulations here, and I'm an oil and gas engineer myself for 20 years, I was in wireline and then seismic. So just to touch on John's point there, some of the sources used in wireline are around the size of 18 curies. And to give that some perspective for you, if you picked up one of the sources, and it's about the size of this pack of mints, for example, and you put it in your pocket, and you kept it in your pocket for an hour, you'd have a 50% chance of surviving a month. So they're rather large sources. But that aside, in terms of regulation, to go back on that, the Environment Agency, basically the Environment Agency under FOI told me they do not check the quantity of flowback water that flows back up the well, or flowback fluid, should I say, water, because if you drunk it, you would die. So consequently, they don't check the quantity of flowback, and that flowback water is very difficult to dispose of and very expensive to dispose of. The Environment Agency also, when I asked them under FOI, who will be treating that water and the norm, how will it be treated, where will it be treated, and where will it finally be disposed of, they told me they would not release that information to me because that was that was commercially sensitive information and would affect the profits of a private company. So I couldn't actually find out any of that information from the EA. The EA also told me that basically the standards they're using at the moment, that they've issued last year clear new shale gas standards. They're using refinery standards, which is completely a different sector, to protect groundwater. They don't understand the shale gas industry, and in fact, to be honest, they don't really understand the oil and gas industry at all. And the reason for that is because they've never had to regulate it. 99% of all our exploration and development has been offshore, not onshore. And just to put one other little issue to bed, fracking is new, not old. When people talk about fracking, we're actually talking now about high-volume hydraulic fracturing. It bears no relation, or a very, very small relation, to original hydraulic fracturing. It's like comparing a small corner grocery shop with Walmart or Tesco. And in the fracking game, size actually matters. So it is important the regulations are upgraded to include shale gas. The Royal Society stated that must be done. It has not been done at all, and I'm working with both Professor Mayer, the Royal Society and my own institution at looking at just why this hasn't been done and what progress now needs to be made to allow fracking to continue in the UK.
Tom Crotty. How confident are you in the regulation of the shale gas industry?
I can speak, as I'm not in the shale gas industry, I can speak about the regulatory environment in which we operate as the chemical industry, which is extremely high. It's the toughest in the world. We work very closely with the Environment Agency. If you take a site like Runcorn, it's a very big site. It's very, very tightly regulated. We have a situation where we cannot let anything leak into the outfalls of that site because it will throw our permits out. So believe me, the regulatory environment in this country is as tough as it gets. And I would have high confidence that that same regulatory environment will be applied to this new industry from standing outside it. That's how it looks.
Sorry, Tom, with all due respect there, Tom, your industry is above ground. You can inspect your industry, you can verify what's happening, you can look at filter rate receivers. It's all above ground, which is where the EA
Mike,
makes a crucial mistake.
I'm going to bring in Chris Matthews from the water company United Utilities. What facilities are there at the moment to treat the flowback water that Mike was referring to? I mean, a new facility is needed. He said it was going to be very costly. How much is it all going to cost?
Well, United Utilities provides water and wastewater services across the North West, and in doing so, we interact with the natural environment on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis. So we understand the concerns and the issues relating to the natural environment. We've got some expertise to bring to the discussion. I think when it comes to treating wastewater, I would echo the comments that have been made already about the importance of environmental regulations and making sure that any facilities that are available in the North West can treat to the standards that are set before us, which have changed since fracking began in the North West, changes to environmental regulations. So from our point of view, should United Utilities become involved in treatment of flowback waters, we would do so in accordance with those environmental regulations.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
You have been involved in the treatment of flowback because 848,000 gallons went through Davyhulme and into the Manchester Ship Canal.
Indeed, in 2011, that's correct. For 6 months, we did take some flowback water that was done under a set of the waste permits that then have changed since that point. And when they changed, we stopped doing that. To try and put the implication or the impact into perspective, it is discharged into the Manchester Ship Canal. I live in this region. I would be concerned if I saw radioactive waste go into the Ship Canal. But Davyhulme is our largest treatment works. It's one of the largest in Europe, and the dilution effect was 1,000 times, such that what was going into the Ship Canal was significantly less in terms of radioactivity than your dental X-ray. So we've got to put into context and perspective that what was done at Davyhulme was done under the appropriate regulations at that point.
At that time, yes.
And was heavily diluted.
Okay, this is
but
obviously
you won't
it's a
take
different.
it anymore,
no, Mike,
is that right?
sorry, hang on just 1 second. I just wanted to come back to you on the who pays for this? Who pays for the treatment of this water?
But the treatment should be paid for by the operators of the shale gas wells.
Yeah, sorry, Annabelle.
Chris,
My point on that was more along the lines of if you're not verifying the quantity of flowback that flows back up the well, what we saw in the States was it was very tempting for the operator to under-declare or accidentally lose a certain quantity of that flowback before it reached the treatment facility, which could save the operator a significant amount of money.
I find that offensive, Mike.
It's the reality. Look, you're a private company. It's the reality, Francis.
Where is it the reality? Where's your evidence to show that's the reality?
It's the reality in
Where
the
is your
States.
evidence to show that's the reality
I'm not
here?
saying you've done it
You
here.
just said that.
It's the I'm not saying you've done it here.
You just said
I said that it's tempting for you to under-declare if it's not verified at the surface. Of course it's tempting for you to under-declare. It's a huge cost to you, Francis.
Okay, Barbara Keeley. Let's bring Barbara in. Do you think that the Environment Agency is under pressure from the government in any way to let...
Massive pressure. I mean, the Prime Minister has said he's going to go all out for shale gas and he's going to win this debate. I mean, what does that tell you about the pressure that is on from the top of government? But just a couple of points to make. I am not an expert. I have had to learn a lot of things just to cope with what's happening in my constituency. But all of this argument about the chemical industry is safe, or we use these radioactive substances in MRI scans. MRI scanners are used in a very controlled way in hospitals. If I have a dental x-ray, the dentist and his assistant go out of the room so they don't get an extra dose. My constituents live between this Barton Moss site and Manchester Ship Canal. So to be perfectly honest, it really worried and added to the worries that my constituents have got. They've already got the site, the shale gas exploratory site up the road, and now they've got the Manchester Ship Canal flowing past them, and they're not sure what United Utilities are doing with the water. So I think the other thing, the starting point for the question was about the damage that can be done in terms of this issue of water. I have repeatedly raised with government ministers, and most recently there was a piece of legislation, a water bill, and raised with the Environment Secretary, with Owen Patterson, issues about that. And these were just dismissed. I never get any answers, because it's vital that we protect resources which, like chat moss, there's a real fear that the water needs of this industry, or polluted water, will have a real impact on our natural areas and on wildlife. And so I'm worried about it from the people point of view. I'm worried about it from wildlife. I'm worried about it from that precious Mosslands resource. Why on earth this company and the landowner came along and dumped this industrial process with its chemicals and its radioactive substances down next to one of our most precious green belt resources is beyond me. But that's the situation we find ourselves in.
Okay. I should say we did ask the government to take part in tonight's discussion, but as you can see, nobody was available. Francis Egan from Quadrilla. There's been a lot of concern, and maybe understandable concern, about water supplies. Will they be monitored? Should they be monitored throughout the process and after the process?
Yes, somebody said that the Environment Agency don't have experience in this onshore. I mean, that's just not true. The Witch Farm field in Dorset in south of England was at one point the largest onshore producing field in Europe, producing 100,000 barrels of oil a day. With that oil comes tens of millions of gallons of flowback water. Exactly the same constituents, exactly the same issues with naturally occurring radioactivity material, treated, disposed of, without incident. So the Environment Agency have a lot of experience in this, and I do believe that the Environment Agency, they have got excellent people, they've got excellent systems, as do the HSE, and I have complete confidence that the industry will be regulated.
I'm going to come back to you, Stephen, just to give you a bit of a right of reply here. Barbara seems to think that the Environment Agency would be under pressure.
Quite a lot has just been said, and I don't recognise a lot of the facts that have been said. The Environment Agency is the principal regulator in England for the environment. Our staff are entrusted to ensure that industry works to a very high standard to ensure that people and the environment are protected. All our work is up to public scrutiny, is available. Permits that are applied for are publicly consulted on for shale gas activity, so the public can have their say and see what's written into those permits. In those permits is a requirement to record how much flowback water is produced and state how that's going to be dealt with, and that is independently inspected by our inspectors. So the Environment Agency are there to ensure that the high standards of UK law are enforced, and that is our role, and our staff will stand by that.
Okay.
The
Steve, thank you very much.
Told to issue standard permits in 2 weeks, and that won't involve any public consultation, so it's going in completely the wrong direction. There's not going to be any community involvement in this at all, and you know that's a fact. And you know also the Environment Agency are being cut, 15% staff cuts, resource cuts as well, and that's going to have a huge impact. I mean, it's difficult enough already with a handful of wells, 4,000 wells. How is the Environment Agency going to cope with that? And just
That's
one
right.
quick point.
It's gone from 4 to 6 months to 14 days.
OK, Mike, just let Helen finish her point and then we'll move on.
GDF, who invested in Dart Energy, who have got licences in Cheshire, cited one of the reasons for why they chose the UK over any other country in Europe was that we had a much less challenging regulatory regime here. And I think that tells you all you need to know about the regulations in the UK.
Right, this is... I think this is... Let's be really clear about this. The UK's regulatory regime is considered a global exemplar by the globe.
By the industry.
Because it was looked at post what happened in America, and they looked at it, and the Norwegian and the UK's regulatory system is seen as the global exemplar.
And that's why the government scrapped the offshore safety division, isn't it? That's why
let's go one step further. We onshore are regulated in exactly the same way as the offshore industry is regulated. So it's the Department of Energy and Climate Change, the Environment Agency, the HSE.
That's not true. The Environment Agency are not offshore.
Mike,
that is not true.
Mike, that's absolutely true. The the Department of Energy and Climate Change and the Health and Safety Executive. Onshore, we also have the Environment Agency regulating us. We also have the local planning officers and the council regulating us. And we also have one other important constituent regulating us, which is the communities in which we operate, who watch us 24/7.
All right, well, let's bring... All right, John.
And one final thing as well, going back to Barbara's point, we also do baseline surveys before we go onto a site, during the time we're on the site, and afterwards.
I'm going to ask somebody from the communities that you mentioned. Anne Selby, you asked the question. What do you think from what you've heard?
Thank you. I mean, I wasn't being critical of the Environment Agency. As the Wildlife Trust, we do a lot of work with the Environment Agency, and I do think they are good regulators. It is really the framework that the government's going to put them in is the issue. And I think the question that was behind the point I was making is that actually it's the quantum, really. We're concerned, obviously, as well, I've trust about the water bodies, the marine and other wildlife, and the disposal of the amount of wastewater, the salinity of it, which you can't put through wastewater treatment plants, and is highly toxic at the levels of concentration. And it's just really the quantities are going to be significant, and I think that's what's been giving us some concern.
All right, Anne, thank you very much. You're listening to Fracking, the big debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Can we have our next question, please?
Yeah. John Taylor, Lancashire County NFU Chairman. Do the panel members agree with the NFU that there is a need to monitor both the direct and the indirect impacts of shale gas exploitation and exploration upon agriculture?
Helen Rimmer?
Yes, absolutely. I think the fracking's impact on agriculture could be very serious. We look at what's happened in the US and Australia, and some of the biggest opponents of fracking there is the farming industry. And, for example, the NFU in Canada, which is mostly representing family farmers, is very much against this. In Australia, we see as part of the Lock the Gate movement, farmers at the front line of that are trying to stop this industry. And when we look at the evidence from Pennsylvania, we've seen evidence and examples of cattle having to be in quarantined, of dairy production numbers declining in correlation with the intensity of shale gas drilling. And we're seeing consumers worrying about this as well. A frack-free food alliance has just started up in the UK. So I think producers will start to worry about this as well. And I think this could be a very real threat to the farming industry in the northwest. And we have a very proud farming industry with a long history here in the UK, and very serious concerns about it.
Francis Egan. People may have been concerned by images from the US of dead cattle lying by fracking sites. I mean, what can you say to that?
Well, in response to the question, I agree entirely. I think that there should be monitoring. There should be monitoring before, during and after, and certainly we will do that. And the water quality and the air quality will be monitored and measured, and the Environment Agency, and I'm sure they will back this up, will also take their own independent monitoring. So absolutely, I agree. And there should be complete disclosure of what chemicals are going into the fracturing fluid, and there should be complete disclosure of what's in the flowback water, and there will be disclosure of where it's being treated once those commercial arrangements are in place. So I agree entirely with the questioner. All of that should be disclosed.
And what about the images that have supposedly been seen of dead cattle, supposedly due around fracking sites. Is that fabricated?
Well, if I was to go through every image that was supposedly have been seen around a fracking site, we'd be here from now until eternity, frankly. Those images, I can't tell you whether they're true, fabricated, or not true, because
But it's not a concern to you.
What's a concern to me is that people are clear about what we're doing, that they get the data, that the emission data is available, and we monitor and measure it, which we'll do. And I agree entirely with the questioner, and that should be available to landowners and farmers. We haven't had a particular issue getting leases from farmers who are still working their land right beside us.
Tom Crotty?
I think I just echo what was said in the question. I think it is absolutely essential that those processes are in place before, during and after. I actually believe that if it's well managed and the industry works closely with the farming communities, with the NFU, that there's something here of benefit to agriculture as well as to the general community.
In what sense of benefit?
I mean, shouting rubbish isn't really an argument, is it? That's not really debate. I'm just giving you my opinion. My opinion, well, I have got a little bit of experience because I actually studied agriculture originally before I went into the chemical industry.
So, Tom, what benefits do you see?
I think there are potential benefits from the flows of money into rural communities that, let's face it, are having a pretty tough time right now, and I think we'll find that is a significant benefit. And I think to just dismiss that out of hand is just a nonsense.
Mike.
Sorry. The money into your back wallet. How do all the other farmers make money out of this industry, apart from the one person with the site?
We may not be able to hear you, sir, but I'll repeat what you said. How can farmers make money?
Now, apart from the one person who has the site, which is fair enough, he'll make money.
Okay.
All the people around him, all the farms around him,
how
will they benefit from that one fracking?
And who would you like me to ask that question to?
I'd ask you to Mr. Egan.
Mr. Egan.
So I'm assuming the farmers are members of the local community, so all the local community will benefit from the revenues associated with fracking sites. All the percentage share of the revenues and the money that's spent in the community. There will be a lot of money spent in the community.
Okay, I'm getting Mike Hill, because you started there.
Just a few points on this to John there as a farmer. First of all, back on Francis' point, to be honest, no amount of money, Francis, whether it was 100,000 a well or 100 million a well, is worth the damage to newborn infants and to the public, and cancer, and congenital heart defects. To be honest, it's just not worth it, no matter
Mike,
how much money.
I wish you'd stop scaremongering. Where is your evidence for damage to newborn infants?
The evidence is
Where is your evidence?
The evidence is from MIT. You can come and have a look at it right over here, Francis.
So, and that's a verified, peer-reviewed study that demonstrates
peer-reviewed study verified from MIT,
Rubbish.
from Princeton,
So, Mike,
from Colorado School of Public Health.
will you comment on the public health of England?
Can we just get back to
Mike,
health in England? Yeah.
Mike, let's talk about agriculture.
Yeah, let's talk about. So on the agricultural side, which is very important, there's two factors through here: agriculture and tourism, which employ a lot of people. But on the agricultural side, that could be absolutely destroyed by fracking. And when I was talking to various European senior civil servants in Brussels, they made it very clear to me that if there's a leak from these wells, and let's face it, wells leak, around 6 to 10% of wells leak, if there's a leak from these wells and it's undiscovered and it gets into the food chain, whether it's via a borehole, a watercourse, whether it comes into the grass and then into the milk via the dairy side of things, if that happens, it will make the BSE crisis look like a kindergarten. They will impose bans of produce around wells in the area of around 30 kilometres for 30 years. So we are facing absolute decimation and destruction of the agricultural sector.
Let's deal in some facts again. Mike, let's deal in some facts.
Right. John Blakemyers.
First of all, there are over 2,000 wells onshore for oil and gas that have been drilled in the UK.
None of them have
Yes,
been
there
fracked.
have. There are over 200 have been
no,
fracked.
No, they haven't. That's absolute tripe, and you know it.
1 second. Let John answer the question.
No, DEC says over 200. Those wells, but let's if you take nothing away from this evening, take this 1 point away. Take this 1 point. There is this whole debate, right, is being called fracking. Fracking is not actually the issue. The issue, and the thing that you have to hold us, the industry, to account is something called well integrity. If we design, construct and drill that well properly, leaks will not occur, etc. So that's the issue that you ought to be concerned about.
This seems like a perfect opportunity to bring in Peter Brown, Deputy Director of Policy at the Health and Safety Executive. It's your job to check and inspect the wells. How will you do that? How confident are you that you can do that?
Good evening. I'd just like to start by saying the system we apply to fracking is based on 25 years of experience of regulating offshore drilling and extraction, so we've got a lot of experience in this area. The approach we use is to start off with standards established by the industry with input from ourselves and the Environment Agency. So there's good practice standards for well integrity, very available, very accessible. There's a requirement in law for every drilling operation to be checked by an independent well expert who monitors the construction, the maintenance and the operation of the proceedings, and who submits reports to the Health and Safety Executive for checking. We've also given an undertaking with our colleagues in the Environment Agency to visit every shale site during this exploratory phase and check the safety and environmental critical elements of that site.
Do the companies themselves have responsibility for checking the wells as well?
The companies do have the responsibility to check under the law. The prime responsibility is with the duty holder within the law.
And how often is that throughout the process, after the process, before the process?
It's all through, from design to completion to abandonment of the well.
Annabelle, can I come back on that, some of those points, please? Can I just put very quickly?
Go on, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the 25 years, absolutely right. And the HSE did have 25 years' experience, post-Piper, from Lord Cullen. However, the government decided to scrap the Offshore Safety Division on the 1st of April last year, and the Offshore Safety Division also looked after onshore. So a good deal of that experience is now being lost. The likes of Steve Walker and Grant Moody, etc., have gone. In terms of checking the wells, the HSE have not checked the wells that Quadrille have drilled in Lancashire once for well integrity in the entire time they've been
there.
I
was going to ask you that, Peter. Is that true?
We've had regular discussions with Quadrille.
Discussions.
Have you actually checked?
Once. And those discussions were in Aberdeen. You would not come down to Fylde Borough Council and discuss this once. And I was told by one of your operators there in the HSE that basically you couldn't afford the petrol money to do so. And so why would you come down? And I wouldn't expect to pay it out of my own wallet.
Let's just ask Peter to reply to that. Have they been checked?
We have visited the sites.
Do I take that as a no?
No, you don't take it as a no, because the checks are done through the provision of plans and designs. Well, let me just suggest we think about a well and how much of it is actually visible, because a well is obviously under the ground. We could visit a site and we can look at.
But
we can look at the top of the well.
You can use annular pressure readings.
The critical part of the check is the design of the well.
But that's a concern, isn't it? I mean, that will be a concern to people here today, that if you haven't checked the few that are here now, what about when there are hundreds of them? How is the HSE going to check them then?
We can check all the wells that are being planned at the moment. My colleagues...
Can I just say that the HSE have checked all the wells? It's completely disingenuous of Mike to say they haven't checked the wells. Let me finish what I'm saying, please. So that the HSE get copies of every single well log. Mike said there are well logs. They get copies of the daily well reports. So unless you're going to suggest, Mike, that in addition to dumping the water, we're also fabricating the daily reports, then the HSE get a copy of every single...
I'm sorry, Francis.
And they evaluate it. And if they have questions on it, which sometimes they do, they ask us.
We've had 2 separate visits from the Environment Agency and from the local planning officers, so it is something that does occur, and the regulatory bodies are acutely... And this is all about ensuring that everybody understands that we are highly regulated, that we are overseen and that we are being monitored.
We have covered that point. Let's bring Barbara in.
Could I say Salford Council, as the local planning authority, has had £100 million of government cuts to contend with, and I know has had to cut its planning department. So the Environment Agency has had staffing cuts. We're looking at all the regulatory bodies have been cut and cut and cut and cut. This new process, this controversial process in Barton Moss, is bringing a whole lot of work to the council as well as it is to me, and there is no extra resourcing for it. We haven't got onto the question of policing yet. It's costing communities and councils like Salford, and it would be Lancashire and Cheshire if it were those places too. But I just wanted to make the point, just in terms of actual experience, not arguing about this point, but I know that people who are farmers, people who are business owners, people who have kennels, pet kennels, people who keep horses, who live around the Barton gas site are very worried about their animals. I've already pointed to the fact of the delivery vehicles don't seem to be in good states, that we've seen hazardous chemicals leaking. That's going up a tiny little road that's almost designated a footpath with a lot of people around it, and it's dangerous to people, but there's a real worry about it's dangerous to those animals. And I think the question we've got to answer is, would we, as time goes on, as the months go on, want to buy meat or milk or other products from farms that were right next to that, with vehicles going down the road leaking chemicals, using radioactive substances? We wouldn't. I wouldn't. I'd be buying them from anywhere else. And the future of Chat Moss was agricultural. The council's strategy was to put more agriculture there because it's very rich agricultural land. This is destroying that chance.
Barbara, I'm glad you brought it back to agriculture. I think we'd almost forgotten what the question was about. John, you asked the question. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, you've picked up an important point there, Barbara, in that will the stakeholders be held to account if the contamination of land/groundwater takes place, making our produce unsaleable? Currently, nobody will insure us against that. Who'd buy it?
No, the answer's no.
OK, we do need to move on. You're listening to Fracking, the big debate, here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Let me remind you of our panel guests, as if you could forget. We've got Francis Egan from Quadrilla, John Blaemyers from iGas, Tom Crotty from the chemical firm INEOS, the MP for Worsley and Eccles South, Barbara Keeley, engineer Mike Hill, and Helen Rimmer from Northwest Friends of the Earth. We've covered a little bit of this already, but I did want to ask Francis Egan in particular. We've talked about water, but we haven't really talked about tremors. There were tremors near Blackpool. How can you be sure that these aren't going to reoccur?
So I think, excuse me, I think I may be repeating some of what I said earlier, but there were. And after that, as I mentioned earlier, the industry was effectively in a moratorium for 18 months to 2 years, during which time there have been at least 2 separate independent studies completed. And they have concluded that provided we implement the traffic light system that was recommended, and we put 80 odd seismometers around each site, which is no mean undertaking, and we monitor real time any movement, and we stop if the movement gets to a 0.5, which is something that nobody could feel on the surface, then we can go ahead. There have been tremors associated with coal mining, with geothermal for many years, and I accept the word tremors, but they weren't of a scale that was capable of causing damage, and that is in the that is in the report. As far as the well goes, since people want to talk to the well, the integrity of a well means a well should be capable of keeping oil and gas inside and not outside. The integrity of the well at Priest Hall is entirely intact, and the HSC have confirmed that, and I'm sure will confirm that sitting here tonight.
Oh, hang on a minute. Is that right? So you have visited that well and checked that? Is that correct?
We have monitored the well.
I don't trust you, Francis. I'm not trusting self-regulation. I don't trust a word you say. Is it correct HSE have been and inspected that well for well integrity? Because Pater and Beish, in their report, say no.
I'm terribly sorry. I am being told to move on. Okay. So we need to move on. I'm terribly sorry.
So by okay,
I'll let him answer the question.
I'll answer the question. So,
That's the HSE.
Oh, who are you asking the question to? Peter wants to answer the question, so we'll let you answer.
I'm happy to answer the question because we know that the integrity at that well is sound. It's been because you don't need to actually look inside the well.
No, you use instrumentation.
I think you probably have answered that question, haven't you, already? We will move on. We will move on. OK, can we have our next question, please?
Thank you. I'm Paul Foster from the Federation of Small Businesses. What views do the panel have on the potential economic benefits of fracking from both a local and national perspective?
OK. So, economic benefits. I'll come to you first, Barbara, because this is possibly happening in one of your constituencies. Can you see some economic benefits to your constituencies?
No, not at all. I can only see disbenefits. I'm struggling to try to help a group of people with businesses local to the iGas site who find that they're hemmed in. The controversy around the site has actually, the protest and the policing means that people can't get, somebody told me that her accountant couldn't even get to visit her. She's penned in, her staff can't get in and out. If they come to work, they can't get home. All of those issues. It's having quite a severe economic impact. There's traffic congestion. There's all kinds of problems for local people. Sometimes we have to go a very long way around. So there's no benefit. I have never believed that there will be a substantial economic benefit to my constituents because the negative side of this, the disbenefits, are enormous. And the jobs, I've always believed there's a lot of exaggeration around this claim of jobs. That I've asked iGas to tell me how many local people they might be employing, and I haven't really got much reassurance there. I think that the skilled engineering people will be brought in. There might be the odd security job, but the loss to the businesses and the loss to our future at Chat Moss of agriculture, leisure, the other things that we wanted to do and planned to do in our area, these will all be gone if this industrial process carries on in this sort of mixed urban, semi-rural area.
Tom, you sort of alluded to this earlier, that you believe this could have big economic benefits for the region.
I believe it can, and I believe there's a bigger issue here. People might not want to recognise this, but this country is facing an energy crisis. It really is facing an energy crisis. Yes, it is. I'm sorry. You can keep shouting no, but it is facing an energy crisis. We need a mixed economy on energy in this country. I'm sorry. We need a mixed economy on energy in this country. We need renewables. We need nuclear. We need gas. And we have to have all of those. You can't run an energy economy on renewables. It cannot work. A, because you can't get enough, and B, when the wind don't blow, the turbines don't run. When the sun don't shine, the panels don't work.
Helen, this is your subject.
You must have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to state some simple facts. You must have backup generation. That backup generation in the short to medium term has to come from fossil fuels. The fossil fuels that we've got, and particularly gas, are in dramatic decline. And whether we like to recognise that or not, we are going to face a crisis in this country. I believe that shale gas is an answer to that crisis. And it's one that we as a country must recognise, because if we don't, we will not have an industrialised economy in this country in 20 years' time. That's the truth.
Helen Rimmer from Friends of the Earth. Is it time to move away from the arguments to and from and just think, can this be made to work? Because it could bring economic benefits.
One of the reasons you gave was that it's going to bring down energy prices, and no one is saying this is going to bring down energy prices. Someone in the audience might have said that. The Secretary of State says it won't bring down energy prices. Energy experts say it won't, and even I think we've heard Francis Egan say it at one point. But on the jobs question, I mean, clearly any new industry is going to bring jobs to an area. But they've been vastly exaggerated. The figure, I'm surprised you've not mentioned it yet, of 74,000, which David Cameron has quoted, came from a report that Quadrilla paid for, whereas an independent report for his own government was actually a third of that at the top level. So it's been vastly exaggerated. The short-term, specialised, many workers coming into the area, not local, and that's in the independent report to government. So it's been vastly exaggerated, and we think there's a much better alternative in our renewable energies. Already 10,000 people in the North West are employed in renewable energy. That could be vastly more over the next few years if we up our renewables. And also energy efficiency, which is hugely job intensive. We have some of the worst housing in Europe for leaking heat, and if we were to address that, that would create tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new jobs.
Well, John Blamires from iGas, what is the figure then on jobs? Because there are different figures bandied around, aren't there? How many jobs are going to be created in the North West from this?
There are various figures that have been quoted, ranging from about 24,000 to 74,000 in the UK associated with this, and that's just direct jobs. Then you've got to start talking about the indirect jobs that go around supporting the supply chain that goes with this. On top of that, you've really got to start looking, and you look around this area and the number of industries that are reliant on gas to power it, to be the feedstock. What's happening is, at the moment, because of shale gas in the US, the gas price there is about $3 to $4 per 1,000 standard cubic feet. Here it's somewhere between $8 and $11 per 1,000 standard cubic feet. We cannot compete like that. Industries that are reliant upon gas can't. And what's happening is they're going from this country and from Europe back to the US. We have a situation where we are buying shale gas from the US. So in terms of our balance of payments, there are billions of pounds being spent to buy shale gas from the US and then bring it back to the UK.
We're exporting North Sea gas. Why every day do we export North Sea gas?
We are importing gas. Nearly 50% of our gas now is imported. So what we're saying is that we are sitting on top of a huge resource that, if we were to take advantage of that, that will bring jobs, it'll bring skills, it'll be training. And we have to understand this.
John, I'll just bring Francis in very, very briefly before we go back to Paul.
So I agree with some of what Helen has said. In fact, I don't see that shale gas means you can't do renewables. Frankly, the country needs all the jobs it can get. Our graduates are coming out of university and are not finding work or work that they trained for. I'm absolutely convinced that the North West, Lancashire, has the capability to develop this safely. Irrespective of what everybody says happened or didn't happen in America or Australia, this is a country that can do this.
Paul, let's hear from Paul Foster, Federation of Small Businesses in Lancashire, who asked the question.
Thank you. Yes, keen to ensure that any jobs created are for the benefit of local communities, for local people and existing local businesses. Supply chain was mentioned. That's very important. And on the issue of energy costs, it's a huge issue for particularly small businesses. Going, increases all the time, and a key problem for them. Does need addressing somehow.
There's not going to be any effect on energy costs due to shale gas.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ed Davey has stated that in the House of Commons. He's made that absolutely clear. And on the jobs front, I automate oil and gas plant. It's what my business does. And I would estimate in Lancashire, with the 3,500 wells that Francis wants to put between Preston and Blackpool, during the drilling phase, we'll be lucky to reach 1,000. In the production phase, I could automate that with a SCADA control system and 50 guys. And if you balance those 50 guys, their jobs, against the potential huge loss of jobs in tourism and in farming, you're looking absolutely, definitely at a net jobs loss. That's a fact.
So let me... Let me just answer about it. So, Mike,
I'm sorry,
if you can supply a quarter of the UK's gas supply with 50 jobs, you've got the contract.
Francis, I'm going to move on. Just a reminder, you are listening to Fracking, the big debate here on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. If you want to have your say on this subject, on fracking, then you can do so. It's on a phone-in that will be following this debate. OK. Our next question, please.
Hello, I'm Jackie Copley from the Lancashire branch of the Campaign to Protect Rural England. Given the scale of shale gas exploitation envisaged by the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer would involve the creation of thousands of fracked wells, what is the minimum separation distance between well pads, as we understand the frequency of pads will significantly impact on the landscape?
Okay, John Blamos, my guess.
Right. Let's just deal with some facts here. I hear people talking about we're going to industrialise the north. That's not the case. Let's just take a look. Let's use, for example, the amount of energy that is derived from a solar site versus a shale site. Just to put something into perspective for you here. Typically, most solar sites, there are about 120 of them that are over 10 acres of area that are covered by them. We will typically develop a shale site that will occupy about 1 to 2 acres. And it'll have 8 to 10 wells on there. And the amount of energy that comes off that is about 600 times the amount that comes off a similar-sized solar site. So you've got to put this into some perspective. In terms of what sort of separation between these sites, we're drilling down to somewhere in the order of about 10,000 feet. We can then drill out about another 10,000, 15,000 feet out from there. So you're looking at sort of 5-6 square kilometre drainage area from a single site. So you will, most of the time, you won't even see it. We have a coal bed methane site that's just not far away from here, and people don't realise it's there. We operate oil fields in the South Downs, in the East Midlands, and again, people don't realise it's there. So we have a long history of sort of over 40 years of developing oil and gas sites and doing it in a way that's It's exactly the same. There is no difference. Another misnomer.
Okay. John, could I just ask? I mean, how long are these the drilling pads, the rigs up for?
The rig, say if it's a 10-well site, and you're probably talking something of a month to 2 months, you're looking maybe at 12 months to 18 months for the rig being on site, and then it goes. And then you can't really see anything after that because it goes, and for the next 20 years, there are no trucks. Once we're producing, they've gone. At the moment in the US, they are looking at the idea of return visits, as you put it, and they're looking after about 10 years, they might come back and refrack, and that takes couple of weeks to do that, and then they go away again.
Shale gas wells drop off a lot faster than 10 years. But can I just say, sorry, Jackie asked about industrialisation, and the distance between the pads and things along those lines. The UK plans now, the industry plans for the UK to install the first ever super pads. So in the States, we've had pads up to maybe a maximum of 15 wells. We're looking in the UK now of having pads with 40 wells on. And to start comparing it with solar is just absolutely ridiculous, because solar pads don't require 14,000 trucks just to get rid of the flowback. Solar pads don't require generators, lighting, compressors, silica, sand, chemicals, drilling mud, waste. They don't require any of this. This is a full-on industrialisation of the Northwest. And for those communities living near fracking pads, it's going to be absolute bloody misery for years.
Okay.
For years.
I will come to you in a moment, Barbara. But Tom Crotty, do you have concerns about what this could do to local communities, local environments, to the landscape?
Clearly, I mean, making sure that what happens is done with the local community in mind is critical. I mean, we have the same issue when we operate chemical plants. We make sure we have a relationship with the local community that hopefully works.
Barbara Keeley, this is happening around you, around your constituents. What are your fears?
My fears are, as Mike has said, about large-scale industrialisation. I mean, people are already experiencing noise, traffic, vibration. We look back to the original planning application, and it's amusing now to look back on how our councillors were fooled by this. It was all going to be low-key. It was all going to be small-scale. It is not low-key and small-scale because of all the reasons that we've just touched on. So it is. I mean, and what's really important too is what we're suffering is because it's such a badly chosen site. This industrial process, this controversial process, has been brought into a sort of semi-rural area near urban estates next to a motorway. The police are tearing their hair out trying to make all of this work because there's a motorway on one side of it and an airport on the other. There is a secure unit where children are serving out their sentences a quarter of a mile away. There are farms which are being damaged, businesses that are being damaged, and people working and living. It is horrendous. I wouldn't wish this is only in the exploratory phase, and I can see the impact it's having. I wouldn't wish this large scale on any community, and I think it should never have been brought into ours.
I have remained very quiet. Barbara, I have remained very quiet about a lot of the accusations you say, but I think you ought to really clarify for everyone. A lot of the issues that you talked about are because of the presence of the protesters, not because of... Yeah.
Can I say that residents and local people say to me that if you were not there, there wouldn't be a protest there. You have brought the controversy. You have brought this onto our back door. And not only are we paying in terms of people losing business, loss of house price, no insurance cover, and all the other damage, we're paying £40,000 a day to police this so that you can go ahead with it. And
Barbara,
the costs are heading towards £1 million that we, the taxpayers in this room, are paying for this process.
Yes. And why is that being incurred? Because the protesters aren't allowing the local residents, the local businesses, and ourselves to go about the legal and lawful rights.
That doesn't affect the number of trucks you need, does it?
Yeah, but there are trucks going up and down that road every day. The issue is the reason that the police are involved is because the protesters are preventing people from going about their lawful business.
That is absolute nonsense.
All right, let's go back
There's
to
a
Jackie.
huge amount of support for the protection camp from locals, and you know that because you've heard that yourself. There's a huge amount of support, and those protectors there with the blessing of the local residents who are coming along bringing food, bringing clothing, bringing warm bedding for the
And are also being intimidated
because
by a
people
small
are feeling
percentage of
failed
those
because
protesters.
their council did not consult them on this, and certainly no political party consulted them on this. This was in no party's manifesto, so this has been done without a democratic mandate. So people are there protesting because they have a right, because they have not given their consent.
Right, I'm going to go back to Jackie.
I'm not sure
Jackie, who asked the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the panel actually answered the question, actually. We as a landscape organisation would like to engage with operators to make sure any impacts are minimised. And I'd also like to comment, Lord Howell famously slated the North East for its desolate landscapes. He actually meant the North West. And maybe people from Westminster would actually like to travel to the parts of Lancashire where fracking is actually happening, because it is a beautiful landscape. And I think for it to be in anybody's mind as being desolate, you know, it's wrong. So I want to change that fact.
Jackie, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've reached our final question on air pollution. Karen Ditchfield.
Bearing in mind the reports coming out of the USA which show that a single well can release over 100 tonnes of volatile organic compounds and tonnes of hazardous air pollutants whilst bringing a well into production, do you not think it is negligent and highly irresponsible for companies like Quadrilla and iGas to even consider drilling sites so close to villages and local communities? And how will you deal with the constant flow of hazardous BTEC compounds along with the hydrogen, sulfide and sulfur dioxide, which DEC says is likely to be produced over the lifetime of a well?
Francis Egan.
So, again, I'm not going to comment on a report I haven't seen out of the US. We will measure the quality of the air before we start operation. We will report on that. We will measure the quality of the air as we operate, and we will measure the quality of the air after we've finished operation. If at any point we breach the standards that will be put into our planning consent, and the Environment Agency, and again I'm sure they'll confirm this, will come along and take their own independent measures, we will be shut down.
I suppose there is an issue, though, isn't there, about the proximity to villages and local communities. I mean, if we take the US as an example, they have a lot more space than we do.
In the US, there are 15 million people living within 1 mile of a fracked well. 15 million. Now, do you seriously think that if the US were doing what Mike has said, desolating the country, giving unborn children, abortions, that would be allowed to continue with 15 million people? It's ridiculous.
Helen Rimmer.
You're saying all the reports from America are not true.
Okay,
evidence.
Let's let somebody else have a go. Helen.
Yeah, the evidence from America is mounting, and there has been a gap in the data because there have been various loopholes. But the Public Health England report actually does point to some serious health risks, which doesn't. It makes the conclusion that they come to completely illogical, that it's of low risk. When you actually look at the reports that they have in that report, it's just completely illogical. And I think the point about the density of population is very important. And we're seeing sites nearby schools, as Barbara has outlined, in Barton Moss, in Lancashire as well, and also now in Cheshire, where DART are hoping to drill. It's right opposite a school, and the head teacher there and the governors are all completely opposed to this and feel like they haven't been consulted and given their consent. So it's a very real problem. I think the public health risks are very serious.
Karen is absolutely right in what she says, in so much as she's in total agreement with Professor Mike Stevenson of the British Geological Survey, who recently stated that the UK is far too densely a populated country to support a large-scale fracking industry. We are not the US, this is the UK, it is different. Maybe in other countries where there's a huge landmass, it might or might not be possible, that's open to argument, but not the UK. And for Francis to say he's going to monitor this and monitor that, with all due respect, Francis, I don't trust a thing you say or do. I trust the HSE, I trust the EA, I trust independent monitors. This cannot be self-regulatory. We can't rely on self-regulation. We've seen it. We've seen it in the financial services.
The Environment Agency will come along and they will do their own monitoring.
We've seen it in the Care Quality Commission. We cannot have a self-regulatory regime in the UK.
Like, if we were self-regulatory, why are we out?
It is entirely self-regulatory, Francis.
Why are we not out doing it now, then?
You send a fax
why are we not out there
to the HSE
doing it now, then?
to say, it's all tickety-boo, so we're doing just fine, thanks.
So why aren't we drilling?
That's the regulation.
Why aren't we drilling,
It's a total disgrace.
Why aren't we drilling?
It is an absolute total disgrace.
Why aren't we drilling?
You know it, Francis. You know.
You
Mike,
are talking rubbish.
One second. Steve Molyneux, is it self-regulatory?
Well, in terms of air quality, as I said before, the fracking sites may require up to 8 environmental permits. There are risks around air quality for fracking sites. They're principally, I think, the Public Health England assessment pointed towards this around the exhaust fumes.
The draft report.
Around exhaust fumes from the fracking equipment, but also there's the gas that returns to the surface. Fracking operators are required to apply for permits to detail how they're going to safely manage those to ensure that they use technology to reduce emissions, and if there's gas produced and it's flared, flaring of gas has to be done in line with what's called best available techniques, so the best standards that can apply across the EU. They are required to monitor the air quality around those emissions, and we are required to go and independently assess those, which we do if we issue permits.
So, sorry, one point there, Annabelle. Public Health England, everything Public Health England said, indeed every politician says, including from David Cameron downwards, is as long as it was strictly or is strictly regulated, then these things are okay. Well, guess what? It's not. So then these things are not okay.
Tom,
sorry,
Tom Crotty.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I tried to interrupt you a while ago on this, Mike. This issue that somehow this is a self-regulated industry is just complete nonsense.
But it is.
I'm sorry. It's no more self-regulated than my industry is. We are under very, very strict regulation. The reality is you cannot have external inspection. Can I finish, please, Mike? Because you've had a lot to say tonight. Let me finish.
Let
me finish.
Just Tom finish his point.
Thank you very much. You cannot have a situation where external inspectors are on site 24 hours a day. There has to be...
Tom, sorry.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. You have to have a situation where the onus is on the operator to prove that they are doing things properly, and if they're not, they get prosecuted. That's the system we use in this country.
Okay. I just want to take you back to the actual question, because we're talking about the close proximity to communities. So, Barbara.
Well, in my constituency, we already sadly have an air quality problem from pollution from 3 motorways. This site, the Barton Moss site, is near the M62, the M60 and the M602. It couldn't have picked a worse place. We've already got some of the worst mortality from air pollution in Salford anywhere in the country. So there's real concern about this. When, just trying to find out about the industry, trying to find out what was happening, you look up that in the States there are all kinds of issues, increase in asthma and other things that come from this. So it is a real fear. And there are schools less than a mile from this site. So we already have very poor air quality. In fact, the Highways Agency had to abandon a plan to widen and to have more traffic on the M60 motorway because of European legislation, thank goodness for that, which says you can't make air quality worse once it's got to a certain level of exceedances. We're at that level all around this site. So anything that's added into that sort of toxic brew that we've already got from traffic, including the additional traffic and congestion that the site is causing, is a real cause for concern. And I'm very fearful that we start to see more asthma and more respiratory disease just from this.
John Blameners.
I'm very glad, Barbara, you raised the whole issue. That site it's surrounded by motorways. The amount of pollution coming off the motorways dwarfs anything. Let's also be really clear again. We are not producing any gas from that site. There is
producing lots of traffic and lots of traffic congestion for not, apart from anything else.
In about 5 minutes on the motorway next to us, that dwarfs any traffic that we've had over the
So
last
that's
3
okay,
months.
then you can just add whatever you like.
No, I'm trying to put it into some perspective, Barbara, so that we are having a sensible discussion about this.
Can I go back on Tom's point there? Sorry, can I just go back on Tom's point there? I agree you can't have the HSE on site 24 hours a day. That's patently obvious. But I think you can have the HSE on site once in 7 years. And we didn't even have that. 0 inspections for the whole time that Quadrilla have been drilling for well integrity.
Well, John, that's not true. The HSE have been on our site.
No, they haven't.
Yes, they have.
I've got an FOI.
Have the HSE been on our site?
Zero inspections for well integrity
have the
in
HSE
7 years.
been on our site?
John Blameners, as I'm walking past you, will you be monitoring air pollution?
We monitor it. We have baseline surveys before we move on the site, whilst we're on the site.
And can you release them? Have you released them? I've asked you for those.
No, I've asked we have also written to you about 5 or 6 times explaining that, and it's on our website.
You didn't.
The results are on the website.
You didn't send me the information. I asked about it repeatedly.
Yes, we pointed you to the website.
You're monitoring yourself.
No, we're not. It's an independent measure, and it is published on our website, so it's freely available.
Who's doing the monitoring? You just heard the Environment Agency say they will come and monitor our sites.
Yeah.
So who's doing the monitoring?
I'm asking John. Who's monitoring? He said that information is available. Who's doing it?
One, there's an independent, and they monitor it
so it's not the EA.
Wait 1 second, Mike. We have 5 or 6 boreholes there, and we monitor it, and we have published those results on the website. We've also had 2 visits from the Environment Agency who have gone through and looked at what we're doing, etc., etc.
Gone through and looked at what you're doing. We're back to box ticking again, John.
No, we're not. They've come to the site, they've looked at
load
it,
of
and
tosh.
Let me go back. As a result of Piper Alpha, the whole industry went to a goal setting.
Yes, it did.
And that why?
Right.
Because there was a detailed discussion
I'm going
about
to
how
stop
to
you
best
there
do it.
because
the government scrapped the OSD.
Mike, I'm going to have to stop you there. Let's hear a last thought from Karen, who asked the question.
I think you're either incredibly arrogant, or maybe you far more intelligent than all the engineers and all the gas companies in America and Canada and Australia, to think that you can actually do something different here. It's incredibly arrogant of you. And I want to pull you up on one point. I live less than a quarter of a mile from the Grange Hill site. Now, 3 years ago, I think it was roughly about 3 years ago, we were promised that our fishing lakes would be tested by Quadrilla. How many years down, and they've still not tested it?
And the problem with the fishing lakes is?
We at the time when your consultants came on site to test our well water, we said, well, we'll let you do it on condition that you also test our ponds.
Okay, I'll let Francis answer this very quickly, but we've slightly gone off subject. Francis, just very quickly, do you have a reply to that?
Because I don't think I will ever trust Quadrilla. I will never trust you. You don't keep your promises. You broke your planning rules.
We're back to trust, Francis. Let's end with that point.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but we will monitor before, during and after at all our sites.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I'm afraid that is all the questions that we have time for. Thank you to all our panel guests, to Mike Hill, Helen Rimmer, Barbara Keeley, to Tom Crotty, John Blaymyers and Francis Egan. Thank you very much. And thank you, of course, to our audience here at Haydock Park Racecourse. You've been listening to Fracking, the big debate on BBC Radio Lancashire, BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Merseyside. Thank you for a very wonderful and lively debate. Lively. Goodbye.